Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Darren Franks. I've been invited to moderate this session today. Really looking forward to the content. We have some amazing insights into talent in digital financial services across the continent. Before we get started, if everyone could just pop into the chat box and make sure you can hear me before we get too busy and start talking and realizing that no one can hear us. Can we just pop a quick hello or hi into the chat bot? That would be great. Hi, Ethel. Juliet, Monet, wonderful. It sounds like we're on. Fantastic. So thank you very much for joining this afternoon. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce the two speakers today. We have Juliet Munro, who's the Director of Financial Systems for FSD Africa and is based in Lusaka, and Gavin Krugel, who is the CEO of the Digital Frontiers Institute. I'm going to forward, actually, before we get started, if anyone has any questions, and we really do invite active participation within this webinar, please do feel free to ask any questions into the chat box. We will do our utmost to answer as many as we can throughout the session. So please feel free to mention anything you have in there. I'm going to hand over now to Juliet to do a quick intro and then over to Gavin. Juliet, really over to you. I hope.
Yes, Darren, thank you very much, and hello everyone, and thanks for taking the time to join us this afternoon. My name's Juliet Munro, as Darren mentioned. I just wanted to very briefly introduce FSD Africa and what our interest is in all of this, and then hand back to Darren, and I think Gavin will then say something about DFI. But basically, FSD Africa is a Nairobi-based DFID-funded financial sector development program. Although we're in Nairobi, we have an Africa mandate. Our ultimate goal is to reduce poverty by making finance work better for all Africans. So not just corporates, not just high net worth individuals, but low income people, households, small businesses, etc. In other words, we're trying to achieve financial inclusion, which I think is also a goal of many fintech and other organizations out there. And we believe that trying to achieve this, we really need to make Africa's financial markets work better, which requires greater investment, both on the sort of long-term finance and capital market side on the one hand, and also the retail-based financial services on the other. And it also requires effective investment in supporting infrastructure like regulation, information, skills development, etc. We at FSD Africa believe that fintech does play a key role in this. And by fintech, we're sort of defining it as using technology and innovation to compete with those traditional financial services that we're all familiar with, and also the different means of delivery in delivering those services. So we believe fintech plays a role in helping organizations build efficiencies and scale, and helping provide not just access, but really a gateway to longer term wealth creation. But as we know, fintech is not ultimately about technology, it's about people. And so in order to advance and leverage the benefits of technology, organizations need access to skilled and motivated people. And that's really why we as an organisation have partnered with DFI. So Gavin will say something about DFI, but their primary role is to build that pool of human capital in digital finance, as well as to create and share knowledge on the issues that impact on this emerging sector. An emerging sector that's differentiated in its own right from traditional sectors like banking, etc. We're excited about this webinar, through which some of these recent insights that DFI have gleaned through research will be distilled and shared. And in particular, this research that was done last year, which looks at leadership, mood, costs, what's important, issues around gender, etc. It basically provides a landscape view, and it's designed to help decision makers like some of you to benchmark and improve capacity planning, talent development, remuneration and retention. So we're very excited to be part of this. And on that note, I'll hand over to Darren again. Thanks.
Fine. I'm going to pass the baton straight to you, Gavin. I think if you could do your introduction, tell us a bit more about DFI and yourself, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Thanks, Darren and Juliet, and thanks, Juliet, for covering a lot of what we do. Just to reiterate, the Digital Frontiers Institute is a capacity building institute looking to create digital finance as a profession. And we believe that digital finance is a profession distinct from banking. And our objective is really to focus in on developing markets and to create as many as 5,000 new digital finance professionals, ending in the next 3 years, meeting those targets. My name's Gavin Krugel. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of the Digital Frontiers Institute. I have a background in financial services mainly and development, and I was one of the early pioneers in mobile money. Darren, shall I just jump into the report?
Yeah, Gavin, I think you can. You know, the report here is obviously very conclusive. It's a very, very detailed report, and Gavin, you've condensed this to a bit more sort of digestible format for this webinar. But perhaps you can give a bit more information about how this report was compiled, the sort of data sources that you went to, and sort of how this was put together. That would be, I think, very interesting for the audience.
Yeah, sure. So adding to what Juliet described, well, first of all, for the participants in the chat, we've shared a link to where you can find the report. Also in an email that you got the hour before the webinar, you'll find a link to where you can find the FinTech Talent Report from DFI. The report is split into two, but it comes from a single data source. The two parts are really the mindsets of leaders and employees in the organizations that we polled. And then the second is a deep look into the compensation practices of these organizations in the market. So feel free to go and download the full reports. They are quite hefty, but they're great tools. As Juliet explained, we undertook this research because we didn't feel that there was a good framing of fintech in Africa distinct from banking. So the human capital practices of banks, I think, are well understood, but not of this new emerging profession, digital finance. We also, like Juliet, define fintech as digital finance. So it could be anything from a bank or a fintech startup that's evolved in extending financial access using technology. The research itself went into 10 countries in sub-Saharan Africa late last year. We plan on running the research again next year, and we'd like to go a lot broader in Africa, and we'd like to go beyond Africa. So we'll try and do that next year. We looked at companies in 3 different stages of developing: early developing and matured companies, and we were lucky enough to get representation across sectors, development, not as much government as we'd like, and then predominantly private sector. The report, the research was done with 69 organizations across those 10 countries, and we were able to interview over 400 leaders, business professionals, and managers across those 10 countries. Organization split there, you see around 30% banks, 22% fintech, 9% mobile network operators, and predominantly in the 51 to 500 plus organization size. So quite large organizations, and then medium-sized organizations was the bulk of the input into the report. So that's really the demographics. What I'm going to do now is talk through just some of the findings of the mindsets of fintech leaders and their employees. And after that, I will talk through the compensation practices and what we found there. And Juliet and Darren, feel free to pop in at any time to see clarity on any of the points or ask questions. And then, of course, the panelists will come to your questions at the end of the discussion, but do load your questions in the Q&A section, as Darren mentioned. So I think, first of all, we found that these digital finance organizations were experiencing similar challenges to that of pretty much any organization in Africa, and that was challenges with funding, challenges with home economy issues, challenges with the costs of doing business, local market conditions, poor organizational performance, and that's not really performance at a company level. Well, it is performance at a company level, and performance of actual staff within the company, which is linked to a challenge on talent acquisition and talent development, being able to attract and hire top talent. The leaders of these companies perceived that they had strengths across the board: communication, innovation, collaboration, delegation, problem solving, and risk management, and that their organizations were risk tolerant, nimble, and that they were above average. They had above average to implement change. So, you know, just looking at the landscape there of leadership abilities, organizational abilities, and leadership challenges, not much different from other industries. This was interesting from the report in that 78% of the leaders felt that they have very good to excellent innovation abilities, but only half were confident that they have the right abilities to implement change, and only less than half claim that they are successful at execution. So this was telling, and of this relatively new sector is, whilst they have innovation abilities, they don't necessarily have execution abilities. When polling the mindsets of the leaders specifically, we wanted to understand how they were making decisions. And we found that the fintech leaders had a desire to change from a current decision by council, so taking their senior leadership and making decisions together, to decisions informed by council and driven by data. So, you know, slight subtlety over there is what we found that the leaders wanted to do was really start acknowledging the fact that as leaders, they need to make the decisions and be accountable for those decisions, take responsibility for those decisions, but that those decisions needed to be better informed by the people around them and by data, versus what you'll see in the next few slides is that decisions are being made really in council by intuition. So there you see decision making, 57% indicate that they rely heavily on the input from their people, 29% on intuition and experience of their senior leadership, 14% have established processes and protocols to drive decision making, and none indicated the use of data as a primary input to decision making, which was quite an astonishing finding. We looked at who was responsible for digital strategy in these organizations, and just less than half said that the strategy was being developed by senior and executive leaders. Around 19% said that they had a dedicated, and around 19% had a dedicated strategy team. Around only half of the companies believe that the company strategy is well understood. Sorry, half of the employees believe that the company strategy was well understood. Half of the employees saw that the lack of a company strategy is an issue in their ability to manage, lead, and execute, but that they believe that their company's digital strategies were clear and well communicated. When asked to assess their ability to develop strategy, 64% of these leaders felt that they had very good to excellent abilities, and 78% felt that they were good communicators, which is an interesting contrast, saying from the previous slide, saying less than half of employees felt that they understood the strategies of or they were aware of the strategies of their businesses. It was clear that respondents to the survey had a high tolerance for risk. Around just short of 40% confirmed that they believe that their organizations make fast and efficient decisions, which gives us a sense of a risk-taking culture. As much as 70% said that they wanted or they needed their leadership style to change, and that the current leadership style in the organization wasn't appropriate. Specifically, these leaders believe that they need to shift their current style to be more directive and selective when making decisions. So that ties well to the previous slide that says leaders feel that they make too much decision in council, rather taking input and make decision themselves. 33% of the employees, only 33% of the employees believe that their leadership of the organization view them as assets to the organization. This is contrasted with what Juliet highlighted in an earlier conversation, that as much as 60 or so percent of leaders report that they do see the value in their employees. So there's an interesting contrast there from the way that the leadership is viewing the business versus the employees, or the degree to which employees are feeling valued.
And just to jump in here, Gavin, I think that's a good example of highlighting that there appears to be a communication issue in some respects, and it's apparent in this statistic, but also in some of the other findings of the report, that there seems to be a mismatch between what the leaders are reporting and perhaps what the employees are perceiving, which I think is quite an interesting finding.
And I think you're right. It does come down to that. It comes down to perhaps a communication gap. Maybe this is such a fast-paced industry that the leaders are always looking forward and not taking the time to circle back and bring the employees with them. I think that's apparent not only in this stat, but we'll see quite a bit later some other pointers that point to this gap between the leadership view versus the employee view. Part of that gap, or that talent gap, are the challenges that these companies face on their ability to hire and retain talent. So the primary barriers to bringing on top talent was, of course, competition, and a shortage, or linked to that, a shortage of skilled talent. But what came up quite often was the lack of recruitment skills. And this was not really, the recruiter or the HR administrator that publishes the job specs. It more came down to the interview level and the actual hiring stage of recruitment. And I'll explain what I mean there. But first, on competition, affordability for talent was a major issue that came to light in this report. And when digging deeper into the conversations, one multi-country bank in Africa reported a retention rate for their staff of only 9 months, a churn rate of only 9 months, which says that their top talent was taken by competitors on average within 9 months of them joining the company. What that resulted is the loss of spend, really, of bringing their top talent into the business. But also it meant that they needed to rehire, and they were reporting that they needed to increase the package on average around 20% to fill that position again, and that the source of the labor was always a competitor. So that answers for number 1 and 2, but then also on the right-hand side of that screen, you see there affordability of talent. There's a spiraling up cost of labor in digital finance because of high demand, and yet the talent pool is not broadening as fast as it should. So that was quite scary for me. Imagine having to refill a position every 9 months, enormous cost, enormous waste of time, and then having to increase your budget for that position on 20%. Maybe Darren, later you can talk to us a little bit about your experiences on finding and filling talent in the digital finance space.
Sure, I'd be more than happy to.
We started to take a look into the gender profile of these companies, and we'd like to do a whole lot more work in gender. So, next time round, we're going to start looking at the compensation practices and differences and start creating a lot more awareness about this. But I was super impressed with the feedback. So first of all, the gender profile of the respondents was mainly male. Around 88% was male. But that 88% of male were reporting that there were as many as 39% women in the teams that they lead, and there was as much as 43% women in their executive teams. Now, whilst that's still not gender balance, it's a way lot higher than industry benchmarks. which range at around the 22% mark. So, that was really, really interesting to me that they were reporting a much higher gender balance. What we did ask is, do you struggle to find or to recruit female talent? And Darren, again, you can give us your views there, but 77% of them said yes. And we asked them pretty much freehand to tell us what their perceived challenges were to recruiting talent. And the number one was marginalization of technical female candidates in the technical field. Second, perceived low risk appetite of female talent to join startups. So they weren't able to attract because they were startups, and female talent were looking for more established businesses. There was clear feedback on, they felt that the challenge was clear gender inequality and discrimination. And one which I think we can do work in changing is the belief that only men can perform well in technical fields. So those were the perceived challenges. These aren't actual challenges. It was just the respondents' perceived challenges to recruiting talent, female talent, but as much as 77% of them struggled to bring female talent on board. Let me pause there for Darren and Juliet just to feed any thoughts on the mindsets section of this before I'll go into the compensation section.
Well, I think from my side, when we talk about talent acquisition and looking at the total number of individuals that are in the market versus on the market, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges, or one of the elements that I spend a lot of time with our clients on is getting that understanding of there's a big difference of people that are in the market and people that are on the market. So if you look at some of the traditional channels, we're looking at some of the job boards, the Brighter Mondays, the Indeeds, the Careers 24s of this world. We look at sort of generalist staffing agencies. We look at internal capabilities as well. And when we really address that and we ask what access to the market those channels have, as a total, it's never more than about 30%. Whereas, there's a huge percentile of individuals who are in the market, i.e. working for organizations, probably very comfortable within their roles, that aren't really being made aware of opportunities within new organizations or digital transformation projects that are happening across the continent. So I think there's a bit of perhaps education may be the wrong word, but a bit of consulting that probably needs to be done on a broader level to say, look, there's the active job seeker market and there's also the passive job seeker market, and they're two very distinct sets of individuals. And Gavin, you mentioned a couple of slides ago about using data to make decisions and business decisions, mm-hmm. And that's something that we see happening a lot in talent acquisition. Again, not so much across the continent. It's certainly very popular in in the US or in Europe. It's using data to make hiring decisions. It's taking that bias out of the process, not just looking at a resume or a CV, but getting a more holistic view over someone's skill sets, their EQ, their IQ, their pure competencies, and removing that bias from the process. I think we've probably all been in situations where we've had a fantastic resume that's landed in our inbox, only to meet that person to be bitterly disappointed. And on the reverse, you may have what we would call maybe a substandard or very brief resume, but when you meet that person, they could be your next superstar. So we're certainly advocates of using data to make decisions, not only within your business, or certainly within talent acquisition as well.
Gavin, just to interject before you go to the next section, I mean, I agree with what Darren was saying, and just, I guess with this industry, it's an emerging industry, and I guess the fact that it's emerging and it's not perhaps yet distinct and mature enough in its own right also sort of compounds some of these challenges around talent identification and management, and that kind of thing. I mean, obviously the results that you've highlighted so far do sort of underline that fundamental issue that there is around scarcity. So you've got companies on the one hand that have very aggressive growth targets and goals for good reason, because it's a very competitive market, and yet obviously these big challenges that they're facing in both recruiting and retaining good talent, and the lack of data, both availability and use, I think further helps to compound that problem. And as you say, it pushes up the cost of talent. There's a supply and demand issue here. So for me, it sort of then begs the question of, obviously DFI is playing a role in helping to build that pool, and what's the role of the rest of us in doing that? And that's not just us as development organisations, but that's also fintech industry as well. So I think, as I think you'll go on to in the presentation, is about, well, let's also look at how we can deal with and use what we've got as well within the industry. Given that scarcity is a problem, there is still an existing pool that we can work with, and we can use mechanisms to help improve the situation. So
I think. Oh, go for it. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, fine, I'm done.
Juliet, I think that's absolutely right. I think there's three ways to look at this. A scarce pool, we need to develop a broader pool of talent, and that is what organizations such as the Digital Frontiers Institute do and others do. But it's also for these digital finance companies, big or small, to acknowledge that the talent is scarce in the space. The pool is small, and we do have to develop new talent, right? So we have to build youngsters up, and that's definitely an opportunity in Africa, is to build youngsters up, give them the experience, give them the opportunities, but then also contribute to the development of the staff that we already have. So that's one way of addressing it. The other way of addressing it is to look at ways that you can retain the talent that you've got, and that's creating the right working environment at the right compensation levels. And then with those two tactics is to also attract new talent. So the next section of this presentation really starts looking at what levels do you need to compensate, and what kind of a working environment is emerging as the optimal working environment in the digital finance space for you to attract top talent.
Gavin, just before you go into the next part of the presentation, there's just a question from the audience here. The staff attrition Gavin mentions for every 9 months. Mainly at what level was that? So was that entry, mid-level, senior individuals? Do we have that data?
Sure. Yes, we do. So that's mid to senior. So and more senior, right? So it is mid to senior, but in that is more senior, is that 9-month attrition, that 9-month attrition rate. And that was a sample of one company that gave us that feedback, to be clear. But that one company is in 18 markets on the continent. So their experience across the board is incredibly difficult to keep mid to senior level personnel, and who they lose it to is their competitor, and who they fill those positions with is resources from their competitors, because the pool is too small, at a spiraling up cost of 20% per refill.
Do we know what the attrition rate is for that business? Obviously, we're not mentioning names here, but as a general overall percentage year on year?
No, I don't.
No. Okay. Very interesting. I mean, interesting is probably the wrong word. It's quite a worrying statistic, isn't it? The cost of
terrifying.
It's, wow. Yes, and not only the cost, but it's the disruption to the business, which I think is the other key.
Disruption to the business, leakage of your own strategies. Etc. It's a very worrying stat, and I come from the financial sector, and in South Africa some years back, and we always said you learn the person's name, not the company, because the next time that you see them, they're likely to be working for a different company. And kind of from an employee's perspective, you see that as healthy. I can go where my skills are best put to use, and where I'm best compensated for my skills. But obviously, from a business's perspective, it's just terrifying. And it's something that we need to address.
I know we're going to come on to a slide in this a little bit later on when we talk about millennials. Be good to come back to this question again when we have that millennial discussion and see whether there are some coincidences or some similarities between the new sort of generation of people coming in versus length of employment. But we can come on to that a bit later on.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear from our audience as well in terms of what they think the millennial effect is on what they see today. Get into a little bit of what we saw in terms of compensation practices. So just to remind you, this is across 10 countries and it is across all levels of staff, as you'll see in the compensation a bit later. And so what I'm going to show you is medians and the information that's coming from these 400 professionals. So first of all, pay positioning. So if you look at the pay scale for any position as 0 to 100, what we were asking these companies is where do they benchmark on that pay scale? So where do they hire? So, and most companies hire on the 50th percentile. So what that means is 50% are paid above the median level and 50% below for that specific role. And you can see the other blends there, but maybe it's an obvious one, but most companies are focusing on the 50th percentile. How, for example, DFI has used this data is we now do that as well. So if we have a pay scale for a position, it takes a lot of justification for us to move into the 75th or into the higher quartiles of that pay scale. We try and pay on the 50th mark in our hiring. But there's other ways, not just pay, that you can attract staff. So this is another way that DFI adjusted up, is on average across this industry, staff have 19 days leave per year, paid holiday, and senior leadership and management have 22 days, and the executives of companies have 24 days. So that's across these 10 countries what the median rates are. Just to call out that that's a median rate, but there was a lot of, there was quite a big delta from country to country. And in the report that you can download from DFI, we do have country profiles. So you can actually go to your country and see what the average executive leave days are and what the compensation practices for each of your countries are. So the detail is in there, it won't be in this presentation. More than leave and compensation, which benefits were people or did people find important, and which pay benefits were they satisfied with? So let's start with satisfaction. 47% believe that they are not being paid fairly for the contributions that they make to their organization. 26% believe that incentives are set up in a way to motivate high performance. Keep this one in mind for the next few slides. 26% believe that incentives are set up in a way to motivate high performance. 35% indicate that there is no recognition program in place at their organization, but recognition happens in an informal way. And 30% indicate that there is a disconnect between their performance, pay, and bonus. In other words, they don't see the link between job performance and reward decision, which is tied to that 26%, is interesting when we come to the actual compensation practices in the next few slides. What ranked as important was, nearly everyone ranked healthcare or medical insurance as important or extremely important. Around 90% said that retirement planning was important. Around 88% said that performance bonuses were important, and only 40% ranked study assistance or bursary plans as important to extremely important. So there again, scarce talent pool, but not that many people that keen on getting benefits from companies in terms of study assistance. And our experiences, there's not that many companies that are keen on paying for special skills or training. They're more focused on internal training or the execution skills training as companies. Here I want to call out a little bit of the millennial effect on retirement planning, which changed DFI's approach to retirement planning, is that there was quite a difference in the millennials' response to retirement planning versus any older generations, and that was that they weren't interested in retirement planning. There was a lack of trust in retirement plans and pension funds, and they didn't feel that their retirement funding put into retirement plans and pension funds were put to the best use. They also felt that their own savings would net higher returns than that the retirement funds were offering. So that's an interesting change that on aggregate across the data we couldn't pull out, but it is something that we would like to get a better understanding on, is what is the millennial gap, since the millennials are now the largest portion of the African workforce. What came out quite clearly as well was the importance of non-traditional pay and benefits. Here we kind of listed a whole lot, and we tried to bring in kind of the Google effect, or the Google Office effect, to see how, just to test how the working environment is different, and it is very different. First of all, subsidized meals and chill rooms and on-site fitness clubs weren't as cool and as important as we thought it was. So that, Google Office effect didn't come out very clearly in this work. However, flexible working, so the ability to arrive later and leave later, or arrive early and leave earlier, the location. So workplace location was obviously essential for people looking for jobs. This is very interesting specifically for bankers and specifically for finance in Africa, is a relaxed dress code. So moving clearly away from the suit, to the extent that the dress code at the company was a consideration for employees taking a job, and the ability to work from home from time to time. So you see that, starting to blend, we've spoken, I think, for years about work-life balance, and really now you're starting to see work-life balance becoming a very key component of companies' cultures and what will attract top talent to companies.
Gavin, if I could just interject there, specifically on the flexible working. So certainly what we've seen, and it goes back to the earlier slide about diversity and the inclusion of females within the sector. It's not just about starting early and finishing early, or coming in late and finishing late. It's about having that flexibility to go and do pick up the kids, or to be able to go to run a chore or whatever it may be within the middle of the day, which I think we all know that sometimes it's a lot easier to get some things during the day rather than queuing up first thing in the morning or over the weekend. So that's certainly another element of flexible working, is that leniency and that sort of understanding of work-life balance. It's not just about the 9 to 5. It's how can organizations be flexible? Obviously output still needs to be there, of course, and no one's saying otherwise, but the organizations that are more forward thinking, that are more amenable to these types of situations, are attracting a lot more talent than those that are still rigid in that sort of 9 to 5 block.
Right. And just to add, this is another example of where the report can be applied and can adjust your own workplace conditions. Is what DFI did here is, after seeing this feedback, we implemented a flexible working environment. We always had a relaxed dress code environment. We did a poll for the staff on workplace location, because our workplace location is difficult, but what it turned out to be is that the workplace location is difficult, but no more difficult than any of the others that were options for us. And the staff ended up choosing to remain in Cape Town, the city. And we implemented a very clear remote working policy, or work from home policy, and have given our staff the flexibility that they need. So it's just one way that this report can be used to change the working practices. I think what's difficult here is the sector that we're talking about is digital finance and financial services. So how do organizations that are between 51 and 500 plus workforces start implementing these policies with the security that they're going to maintain the same levels of output or the same levels of efficiency. I think it is a scary world to go into, but as our workforce needs to become more female, and our workforce is in Africa mainly millennial, we have to take these things into account in order to attract the right talent to our businesses. We looked at the way that companies pay increases, and this is where I said keep in mind those 26% and 30% statistics. So companies base their annual increases on the base salary, or 71% put the increase on the base salary, not the total guaranteed package. So you're not getting an increase on your total compensation, it's only on your base pay. The frequency of increases, the frequency and amount of increases. So the average increase in 2016 was 5.3%. 84% of companies pay annual increases. 16% pay twice annual increases. And there was a prediction of 6.1% increase for 2017, which we'll be able to poll next year. Factors that influence organizations' increases, 100% factor in inflation, 96% company performance, economic outlook 82%. A unionized forum is less impactful. Market pay levels also less impactful, and individual performance only at 18%. So if we go back, is how do we drive high performance in companies when really your short-term incentive or bonus is, whilst it's communicated as linked to your performance, actually it's not. It's more linked to inflation, company performance, and economic outlook. So it seems to be a disconnect between the incentive there and the reality. So let's now move to actual pay lines. So what we did is we benchmarked pay lines using the Patterson Broadband Guideline, and we looked at things from primary skills all the way up to top management. And we've segmented this in the 25th, 50th, and 75th percentile. So some definitions here: base pay is your basic salary before any benefits or bonuses. And this is across the continent. You can see that, and in US dollars, you can see that professionally qualified and experienced specialists in middle management across the continent, if you were to benchmark, you should be paying base pays of between $46,000 and $56,000 a year for that tier. Top management between $94,000 and $108,000 per year at the 50th percentile. If it's really top talent and you're looking at really bringing on a star, you'd move to the 75th percentile pay line there in order to bring them across. But that's kind of the range that you would need to be operating for each of these levels. In the report, you can go deeper than this, and you can go per country. So what I mean by deeper is you can look at this scale in the marketing division, in the technology division, in each of the other support, in the operations arm of the business. You can look at what these pay lines look at each of those levels and at a country level. So you don't need to benchmark only across continent. You can benchmark in your own country as well. When comparing the countries, this was on base pay. This was one of the real eye-openers. I went into this report knowing that South Africa and Nigeria are the most expensive markets on the continent, and we were proved wrong. And it kind of makes sense. So here, Kenya, you can see, is most expensive on all pay lines than the other markets on base pay. And let's maybe reflect a little bit on why. Well, not only Kenya, but I think East Africa is probably the most advanced digital finance market on the continent. It's got the most amount of activities, the most amount of fintech startups, the most amount of periphery to M-Pesa companies and innovators. And so, with all of that activity, the most amount of banks trying to do things, with all of that activity comes an incredible demand for talent, and not necessarily an incredibly fast increasing pool of talent. So here I can imagine the spiraling up of the cost of talent is occurring phenomenally. And you see that in what these companies have reported in terms of pay. Another dynamic in Kenya is there's a lot of development activity in Kenya linked to financial services or development industry and NGOs. So we do have quite a big foreign contingent in Kenya that will drive the cost of the cost of talent up. We asked, how do we? A lot of these digital finance companies are bringing in expatriate help or foreign help, and we asked, these organizations, how do you compensate? How do you work out compensate? They use PPP as a baseline to adjust compensation levels. So what you're seeing on this slide compared to the previous slide is if we were to hire a European or an American executive into Kenya, what we would have to pay that European or American executive in Kenya is by factor higher than local company levels. Let's move on to short-term incentives. So what I just showed you was base. So here's the base figures, and now let's go look at what the annual bonus would look like as a percentage of base. So just as a guideline, this is what was coming out. Your lowest or your most junior resources were sitting at 11.2% increase per year, and your most senior resources were looking at 11.2% bonus per year, and your most senior resources were looking at around 27% per year. Which gives you a total guaranteed package. So if you take the bonus plus the short-term incentive, there you see Kenya is still way up there if you compare it to somewhere like South Africa. Let me pause there, or let me stop there. That's, as I mentioned, the report has got a lot more detail. On a per country level and on a per role, so marketing or per division level in it, that you can download and you can go into a lot more detail in. Darren, let me give it back to you, or Juliet, just your observations coming from these compensation practices and findings, and I will go to any slides that you need me to, and I see that there is a question in the Q&A.
Perhaps I could jump in and because I find it, as you mentioned at the beginning, Gavin, I think there's a lot more detail around the country data that's available in the report, and that I think in your next iteration of this research, you're planning to dig deeper to look at what those underlying causes of some of the differences across countries are. Right. I think what I take away from this aspect of the report is that, obviously there are cost issues, and there are mismatches between, actual compensation in terms of salary and benefits and what the ranked importance of benefits are to employees, which I think is, it's worrying on the one hand, but it's also an opportunity on the other, for employees to think about how they can sort of attract and retain talent by offering packages that respond to those deemed levels of importance. And I think your point about the sort of non-traditional incentives as well is important. So they're less around the cost to the company, although nothing comes without a cost. But there are non-traditional incentives that can be applied that could well be attractive and motivate staff to either join or to stay within an organisation. As Darren, you mentioned, the sort of flexibility, as well as some of these other issues that you highlighted. So in other words, I think what I take away is that there are fundamental issues and challenges, but nevertheless, there is scope within what's there to work and to do certain things as employers to help sort of retain good talent. And I think some of the other findings of the report that I noted that perhaps don't come out so much in these particular slides are just that, you know, there is also a lot of room for improvement around how employers sort of reward their staff and the sort of rules and practices around that. And other rules and practices around sort of engaging staff. There's a lot of scope for improvement there, which again is both a risk, but it's also an opportunity. I mean, that statistic on the fact that only 18% of increases are based on performance, I found quite a shocking statistic myself. So, you know, but there's it's not all about doom and gloom. There are opportunities to kind of build on what's already there in terms of what employees actually want and looking for.
So there's just been a message in the chat bot. Juliet, I think your voice is sort of coming and going. I can hear you clearly, but I think there's a couple of people that are having a little bit of difficulty.
I can hear Juliet clearly, so it might be John.
Sorry, I've got an intermittent connection here in Kenya.
No worries. And just on Kenya, if I may as well. And I think one of the, and Gavin, you alluded to this in terms of, you know, foreign investment. We've certainly seen in the last 18 months, the amount of foreign investment that's come into Kenya, specifically from the States and from China, really has had a massive effect on the economy when it comes to salaries and when it comes to, you know, talent acquisition. You know, lots of these organizations that are coming in with very, very deep pockets are taking the top talent from the market because they are still breaking the mold. They're still coming into an emerging market saying, well, if we were to hire this same executive in London or Dubai or New York or, you know, Shanghai, it's going to cost us 5 or 6 times more. So for these organizations, they're still seeing a cost saving, even if they're paying more on the salary side. There's definitely a more, again, from the companies that we represent, a focus on performance linked pay. Absolutely, it's certainly at the senior level, but I think at the entry level or at the professional skilled level, it probably goes beyond some of those sort of hygiene factors. And it's about the whole value proposition, the employer value proposition. What does it look like as a whole? Are there career paths? Are there career plans in place? You know, if there is someone joining an organization in one particular area and they feel that they want to migrate their skills into another part of the business, are there opportunities for them to do that? You know, sometimes it's, you know, certainly encourage organizations to look internally before you look externally. You know, what talent do you have in the organization with the right competencies? You know, skills can be taught, but, you know, sometimes competencies and, you know, communication skills and the ability to negotiate or influence or change really is down to that individual. So I think it's about looking at the entire employee value proposition, as well as the, you know, the core areas such as the core benefits packages. But what is life like? You know, how is someone going to develop within the organization, learn new skills, and be challenged and be pushed? And again, one of the other factors we see, why individuals tend to want to leave. If you ask most people, you know, why are you looking for a new position? 9 out of 10 times it's, you know, either I'm looking for more money or I'm looking for a better opportunity. Well, what does that mean, and why aren't you getting that opportunity within your existing business? And when it gets too late and you're doing exit interviews, and I've been party to these many times, and the individual will say, actually, you know, the reason I'm leaving is because I actually want to go and do this now. And you know, the business or the HR person would sit there and go, well, why wouldn't you tell us that sooner? We could have made a plan. And by that point, it's too late. So I think it's about understanding who's in your business, you know, what are their aspirations, not just, you know, what job are they doing now, what job do they want to be doing in the future, and how can you mold people and take people through that journey?
I think that's right, Darren, you know, and I think what I'm hearing from you and what's very apparent in this report is, well, two things. There is scarcity, so companies are driven to bring in foreign talent. Foreign talent is expensive and does contribute in a way to driving up the price locally. What can we do about it? We can broaden the talent pool. We can raise up our own people and train our own people so that we're less reliant on foreign talent, but also in so doing, we're creating a broader pool and helping the industry at large to not be so affected by that spiraling up of costs when we have to rehire each time.
And an interesting tangent on that. I know certainly in Kenya and in South Africa, getting work permits for expats is very, very difficult. Same in Tanzania as well. It's very, very challenging. So, if we wind the clock forward a year, it's going to be really interesting to see this report in 12 months, 10, 12 months time, Gavin, to see how the dynamics have changed, because I think that's, once an organization or once a business has come in and started paying what I would say would be inflated salaries, does that ever normalize, or does that set a trend moving forward? If there's going to become even more scarcity of skills unless, not I say unless, but until the likes of DFI and FSD have really made a significant dent in the market. To get to that stage, I think it's going to take some time. And if the local governments are making it challenging to get work permits for expats, then I think that's going to drive up price even more.
Juliet, any thoughts from you? Just to let the participants know, I've re-added the link to the report in the chat.
Just a sort of separate thing, but going back to the issue of millennials, I think the thing I found interesting from the report is that, on the one hand, we have this perception, I think, of millennials as being sort of quite whimsical in their decision making and sort of flitting and fluttering around, and yet what I took away was that they do want to stay and that they are looking for reasons to stay. And so if employers are able to package things in a way that make things more attractive, then there is a chance that millennials will stick with a job and not rush to the next job. And I hope that can play out in reality. And I think also, just linked to that, there are some statistics in the report around staff engagement, and which indicated that staff engagement was around 60%, which is double the global average. I think that's quite an encouraging statistic, and that there's some good statistics around pride. Employees are proud to be working for their organisation. 2/3 of them say that, and that they see it as a good organisation with a good reputation. They won't hesitate to recommend whatever it is that they're selling. And so I think that there's a lot of positive aspects that can be used here as well.
Yeah, and Juliet, that is the millennial effect that we're seeing right? So the millennial responses to what are the stay, what would cause them to stay in organizations. It was a lot to do with A, the working environment, B, the leadership's vision, are the leaders visionary, is the organization visionary, a whole lot about working for purpose rather than compensation, so less focus on the money and more focus on the mission, which came out. So that combination of making sure that work fits into my life, work isn't my life, and that I'm working towards something that's beyond just a paycheck. But yes, also an industry that seems to be very exuberant, very driven, very focused, and very proud of what they do.
Great, thank you. We've got a minute or two left before we end the webinar. Is there any other questions from anyone attending this webinar?
I answered a couple on the Q&A, Darren. One that was for the link, which I've shared, and then Eric Minier asked whether or not the total compensation, figures that I presented includes long-term incentives such as shares, and just to confirm that they do not. And neither does the report include long-term incentives such as shares. We did collect that data but it's just too diverse to normalize. So that's something that we can look at digging into in more detail in the next round.
Great, thank you. Well, I think that draws us to a close. Juliet, Gavin, thank you so much. I've certainly taken a lot from this presentation and this report. The report's available on the link that Deborah shared on the chat. I think there'll be a follow-up email as well with a recording of the webinar along with the reports. If you have any questions, Gavin will, I'm sure, share his contact details with you. And thank you very much for taking time out of your day to spend with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Darren, and thank you, Juliet.
Yes, thanks to both of you and to the audience.
Thank you. We'll call that a wrap. Thanks, bye-bye.